Okay, so yeah, quarter top pockets. These are the pockets where there's a gap at the top between your side seam and your the edge of your pocket. If there's no gap, they're what's called a non-seam pocket. The principle is exactly the same. You just use a slightly different shaped basing piece, like to replace the bit that you're cutting out. So I have my pieces of kit here. I have my trouser piece. I've already put my pleat in, just because I find it easier to work with the pleat already in. You don't have to do that if you don't want. I have my basing piece, which I haven't overlocked at all because all of the raw edges are going to get enclosed. I have my secondary facing piece, which is like the bit that replaces the bit that you cut off. I have my pocket bag pressed in half, and I have a piece of cotton tape which you're going to use to stabilize the edge of the pocket. Otherwise you'll find that your pocket edge will gape because you're basically sewing it and cutting it across the bias. So this non-bias piece of tape will stop that from gaping, hopefully. So first things first, move my foot back away. What you are going to do is lie your pocket bag underneath your trouser. Now on yours it should have been marked so that you can line everything up. Now I haven't cut the edge off mine because this is a trouser piece that is from a different pattern to my pocket bags. So what I need to do is flip that, and I'm just going to quickly mark that edge. I'm going to cut it off. So when you're working your trouser pieces in real life, you will overlock them before you assemble everything. But this edge, don't bother overlocking it because it all gets enclosed. So I have to think about this now because it's been that long since I did it. Right. I'm lining my cut edge up. I am going to put my tape in there, have a little bit of a tail sticking out of the top. It just stops everything from ending at the same point as it disappears into your waistband. So it will kind of smooth out the bulk so that you don't end up with like a big old chunk of fabric sticking up underneath. And then I'm going to line my short edge, because you'll see that this is like a kind of wonky rectangle, over. And then I'm going to stitch down.
And which pattern piece was that, Flick?
Oh, I've put them all away now. Yeah, so the pocket bearer, which is this piece, is the one that I sent to you that's marked Tabley. It's slightly bigger than the one that's marked Beeston. And then there's the pocket facing, which is that piece. Does that make sense?
I think so.
Yeah. So I'm going to line it up, make sure that when I move everything, I've got the where I've cut sits where that bit sticks out at the top, because that's where my pocket is going to disappear into my side seam. Oh, it's all common stuff again. Okay. So I'm just going to mark that with a little bit of wax. Can you see? Oh. And I'm going to sew it with, I think, is, yeah, a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'm just going to make sure that everything stayed lined up when I moved it underneath the pocket bag. Sometimes what I find is easier is to let everything else just lie flat and hold the tape under tension as it feeds through. It's not gone far. Stitch that. I'm using black thread. Hopefully it will show up better on camera than if I use like a colour matched thread, but obviously if you guys are doing this real on a pair of trousers that you want to wear, you will
Oh dear. If you can hear us, you're frozen right now. Oh. I'm going to try chat.
okay, so thanks to my wonderful internet provider, I didn't realise that my internet connection had dropped out before I actually done it. So I've stitched my seam. So I've layered all 4 layers together: pocket bag, tape, trouser piece and pocket facing, and I've stitched them with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, so obviously because these are all on the bias, that cotton tape is now stopping it from stretching. So I've pressed, I hate this fabric. I've pressed the seam allowance to one side, so that it sits on the pocket facing, or under the pocket facing. And now what I'm going to do is fold it and press it again, and I'm going hopefully you'll be able to see this. I'm going to roll it so that the edge of the facing sits very slightly underneath the actual trouser piece. There's some water behind you. Can you just grab it? My irons run out of water. No, this fabric doesn't like steam. I just went for cabbage again for my pocket bag piece, and it's decided that it doesn't like steam. So I've pressed that so that the edge of my pocket bag is folded over. So what I'm going to do now is top stitch from the bottom where I've stitched all the way up to the top. And my foot has quite a narrow gap between it, so I get a really close top stitch, and then I am going to mark where my stitching ends on the outside of the pocket, outside of the trouser, sorry. And I'm going to stitch 3 stitches in and then up. Hopefully this will be nice and straight. I'm going to keep my foot on the edge of my foot on the very edge of my fabric where it's folded under, and because of the non-biased cotton tape underneath, it means I can pull it nice and taut and just smooth out the top of the trouser as I stitch. It's rolled slightly, and this would not pass QC at work. So it looks okay from that side, but from that side you can see my stitch lines get very close together at the top. They should be more like they are at the bottom, so evenly spaced. And I think it's because my fabric rolled slightly as I was stitching it. If you've got colour matched thread, then that won't matter so much. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to tuck under the edge of the facing, and I'm going to press that down so that it's nice and straight.
About how much are you turning under there?
It is probably about 1.25 inches or so width of the facing. So I'm turning over probably about 3/8 of an inch underneath. You don't want to turn under too little, because if you turn under too little, then you run the risk that it's just going to work itself back out of the seam. So I've got this spread open now, and what I want to do is stitch from the bottom of the pocket bag and hit the folded edge of my facing so that I can just stitch up continuously. And now at work, because I generally work with very dark fabric, and my pocket bags are usually black, I tend to use all black thread for this, and what I tend to do is colour match my thread for this part to the colour of my pocket bag. So I'm going to stitch, and what I'm going to do is just make sure that I've got my pocket bag pulled taut underneath my facing. Oh, this fabric's horrible. I've picked like the worst fabric that it's possible to pick for a pocket bag.
What makes a good fabric and bad fabric for a pocket bag? This could be a good learning experience.
Well, I generally tend to use cotton, like a good quality cotton for a pocket bag, rather than like this is like a polyester taffeta type stuff. It was literally, I just went through my bag of cabbage and found a piece that was light enough to be able to do what I need it to do, that was a different colour to my trouser pieces so that it would show up on camera. But yeah, it's not great. I tend to use a nice, good quality, quite a fine weave cotton, so it's not like too thick. So what I've done is stitch from the bottom of my pocket bag all the way up. I've caught in all of my, and what you want to do is check underneath, because what you want to try and avoid as you're stitching is this part here getting wrinkled up and bunched up because you've got too much fabric. So as you're stitching it, you pull it tight so that when you flip it over and you've actually got that as your pocket and your trouser, it won't show through that you've got like loads of wobbly bits of fabric inside. So the next bit, this is the bit that I always bugger up at work. You get your bearer and you'll see that there is a wedge cut out of the pocket bag and added on. So you want the edge of your bearer where you've overlocked it to sit level with where it curves round. So you've got probably about 3/8 of an inch. The last pair of trousers I did this on, I ended up having to redo it like 3 times because I couldn't get the bearer to sit in the right place. So what you then do is you fold your pocket bag, because you've already pressed it. Fold that over. And what you want, is the overlocked edge of your bearer and your trouser to line up, which mine does. I'm a little short at the top, so I'm just going to lift that up slightly and mark there, because that stitch line is where your seam will cross. So as you do your side seam to join your front piece to your back piece, it will cut across your trouser here, so that none of this will be visible, none of this will be visible. You need to just snip. Like these scissors over. Snip that so that that all opens out. That's it. So you want the top of your bearer to line up with the top of your trouser. Make sure that's all nice and flat. That to come out slightly. This is the bit where it gets fiddly. Right, that is all nice and smooth and everything's placed roughly where I want it to be. So I'm going to lift that out of the way. And I'm going to mark the edge. So on your templates for your Tably pocket bearer, you'll see that there is an angled edge on the bottom. So you're marking that angled edge of where it sits on your pocket bag. I'm using like a disappearing marker pen, but at work I would use wax or chalk or something. As long as it disappears over time, it's fine. That sits about 3/8 of an inch in, so I'm going to mark. That's where my seam will be. And then I'm going to turn my bearer over. I'm going to line the angled edge back up with where I've marked on the pocket bag. And I'm going to have my mark where my stitch line should be. And I want the edge of my bearer to sit about 3/8 of an inch over. I'm going to fold it to just double check that everything sits nice. This, like I say, this is the bit that I always get wrong at work. And then you end up having to unpick it. So again, I'm going to stitch from about here. So I've got a nice straight line going down there. And I want to hit my pocket bearer on that point of that angle. Now, because again, you're stitching across the bias on both pieces of fabric, take it nice and steady so that it doesn't wrinkle up too much. And just keep scratching everything out of the way. So what I'm going to do is flip that and then press it quickly. Okay, so it's ended up a little closer to the edge than I would have liked. I would have preferred it if it was sat sort of over here. But if it's a little bit closer, it's not a massive problem, because what you're going to do is fold that under and then just press it. But ideally it should be, the edge of this should be around about here. So even though I've marked it, it's still wandered over, which is a bit, I always have problems with.
Another advantage to using cotton for your pocket fabric, right?
Yeah. So yeah, because this is steaming itself out. Every time I put the steam on it, it's like floating itself out of shape, making it cross. Right, so what I'm going to do now is, where I've pressed it down the middle, I am going to pinch hold of it and flip it so that it is wrong sides together. So that you've got the outside of the pocket on the inside. So now, if this is absolutely spot on, which mine isn't, actually it's not that far out, the curved edges should line up. So what I'm going to do is stitch round here, and where my little tabby bit sticks out, that's where I'm going to stop. I'm going to make sure that I've got the pressed fold on the very edge. I'm going to use about 1/4 inch seam allowance. And again, because you're stitching round on the bias, just take it nice and steady. Make sure you've got everything out from underneath. Because obviously if you're doing this on a pair of pants, you're going to have like a whole trouser leg flapping around here. So you don't want it underneath. Okay. And then you're going to turn it back. And all I do at work is just run my fingernail down the seam. And if you've got a decent quality fabric, like decent quality cotton, you should just be able to finger press that down. I'm not working with a decent quality cotton, so I'm just going to give that a quick press. Oh, I haven't quite caught the edge of my corner of my pocket. I want a nice, clean, sharp corner. So I'm just going to do something that would probably give my nan kittens. Just poke my seam ripper into the seam and use that to poke it out. And then if you get it between your finger and thumb, you can usually just kind of work the rest of it out. You just give it a couple of twists and it'll just pop out. So the next step, this is the bit where you have to be brave. Oh, is that in the way? I don't know if any of you were here last week and I talked about having a bar tack here. You would normally put this bar tack in like before you stitch the seam up, once everything's together. And what you are going to do is trim off that. You are going to cut. You're going to be brave, very brave. You're going to cut into your pocket bag on the side where the facing is, not the side where the bearer is. You're going to cut into it, probably about 1/2 inch down from where the edge of the bearer is on this side. Because what you want to do, and then what you're going to do is just trim that bit out. Put that a bit wider, so that you can stitch all the way around here and lift your bearer out of the way so that you can then carry on and stitch the rest of this pocket in place. It'll make sense once I've done it, honest. So again, roughly 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now what you might have to do is, I don't know if the camera will be able to pick this up, where you've had to go round a curve, you sometimes find a little bit of excess fabric. So if you push that down into the seam, then you should be able to get away without having to pleat it. Okay. Then what you are going to do, once you've got that all stitched, that's all nice, is you are going to lift your trouser out of the way, and you are going to catch hold of the cut edge of your pocket bag, your facing and your bearer, but not the other side of your pocket bag. You're going to leave that bit alone. And making sure that there's a fairly decent overlap between the top of your pocket, the bottom of your pocket bearer and the top of your trouser. I usually like there to be about 1 inch or so. We're going to stitch inside the overlocking to stitch them together. So really make sure that you've got everything else out of the way that doesn't need to be under the foot. It's just an extra bit of security to help it all stay together. And then what you are going to do, oh, actually I've done that the wrong way round. I said it had been a while since I did one of these. You're going to pull your trouser out of the way, and you're going to stitch just your pocket bag, your facing and your bearer, making sure that it's in the right place then. Lift that out of the way, and you're going to stitch from the edge to your stitch line, because once you've got your pocket together, I've on the other side pocket, like on this one's a right hand hip pocket, so on the left one you would be stitching from the stitch line to the edge, but because I'm doing a right hand one, I'm stitching from the edge to the stitch line, sorry, from the stitch line to the edge. It doesn't have to be particularly tidy. All it does is hide all the untidy bits. And then you are going to stitch down the overlocking. I always get these bits the wrong way around. Making sure that that sits. So you've got a nice straight edge. Okay, so now is the point where you would put your bar tack in here, because your pocket bag is pretty much finished. All you need to do is, now you may want to use a pin for this to make sure that it doesn't move offline, but you will have a marker on your bearer piece, on your bearer template, telling you where roughly the edge of your pocket needs to sit in relation to the bearer. So what I can do is just pin that. It's one of the few times that my boss will actually allow me to use a pin. And I'm going to stitch along the stitch line that I've already made down to about 1 inch. And then I'm going to stitch across, and then I'm going to stitch right on the very edge of the pocket bag. Now, if you're not entirely sure whether you've got enough space to do 2 full stitches or 3 full stitches, use your hand wheel and manually move the fabric underneath on top of the feed dogs, so that you've got your needle sat right on the very edge, because you want your needle, to go through the edge of your pocket. Like so. So that then is, like that. And then what you're going to see, mine hasn't sat quite right because this pocket bag doesn't match quite the template which I used, which was Lauren's smooth sailing pants. So when you're cutting everything, you would need to make sure that your pocket bag comes up high enough to hit the waistband. Mine doesn't. So I'm going to have to fudge it. I'm going to have to pull mine up.
So I guess if you guys have not cut your pattern bag, your pocket bag yet, or if you have enough fabric, maybe cut it without that downward curve in the middle would probably just about solve it, right, Flick?
Yeah, I think so. Because I did this at like half past 5. So when I was cutting it, I completely forgot that I needed to compensate for the fact that the pocket bag doesn't belong to the pattern that the trouser came from. So at work, we would normally stitch along there just to secure the top of the pocket bag to the waistband, so that everything's that's not too bad. I can live with that. So I'm just going to stitch across the top there. Now normally I would you can see that there's it's causing a little bit of a bump underneath, because the top of the pant wants to sit higher up than the top of the pocket bag. So if that was where it should be sitting, that would all be nice and clean underneath. And then you can just press the pocket bag out. So yeah, this is the point now where I would put a bar tack in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of simulate a bar tack. There. And then I'm going to take the back piece of my trouser that we did the welt pocket on. Now, I was really clever and I didn't bother checking to see that I'd put the pocket bag and the welt piece on the right way round. So I've actually got a front left panel, a front right panel, and a back left panel. So I'm going to have to do it the wrong way round, so that my pocket bag will end up on the outside of my shorts. Obviously, when you're doing this for real, you will not do that. It's more to show you how it looks when it's like completely finished. So what I'm going to do is just line up the top of my waistband with each other. And I'm going to you always have, when you're stitching the side seams, you always have the front piece underneath. So on one side, it will mean that you are working from the heel to the waist, and on the other side, it will mean that you're working from the waist to the heel. But you always have the front panel underneath, because
So basically, having the front on having the front underneath is more important than the direction of your stitching. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It just makes it an awful lot easier, because what you've got to do, and I think Carl might have to move the camera for this one, is you're going to take your stitching up to about an inch shy of where your pocket bag is. Now, if you've placed everything right, then what you want to be doing is having your stitch line hit here. Can you guys see that?
It's a little bit blurred out because the light is so bright on your machine.
No, it's the machine. Switch the light off on the machine if you can.
I can't. There's no off on, other than turning it off.
Block it with your hand.
Is that clearer?
A little, maybe.
No. Well, you want it to. You want where your pocket drops down and where you've put your bar tack in. You want the stitching, your seam, your side seam, to cross at the exact point where the edge of your pocket disappears into the bar tack.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Now I might have to take this a little bit shallow because I didn't leave myself very much room. Right, and then come back out again to my normal. And you want to make sure that the edge of your pocket is tucked up out of the way, because you're going to stitch that down to your seam allowance. So you'll see that I've actually had to step my stitching out slightly to get it to cross at the right point, because what you should end up with is a seam Is that clear? Can everyone see that?
I can.
Yeah. So you end up with your seam crossing your bar tack where it meets the pocket back. And then you're going to just give that seam a quick press.
And you're pressing the seam open, yeah?
Yeah, pressing it open. And then what you're going to do is, where you've got all this that looks quite untidy, snip off that. You're going to make sure that your pocket bag is nice and flat and clean. And you'll see where it's snipped underneath. So I am going to just mark there, so I know where I want my stitching to end. And I'm going to have it on the edge of my seam allowance. I might not have enough to catch in, but that's my fault because I didn't leave myself enough seam allowance when I was when I was putting that row of stitches in, and then that row, I didn't leave myself quite enough seam allowance. I should have left myself a little bit more. What you're going to do is make sure that all you're stitching together is the edge of your pocket bag and the back edge of your seam allowance. just stitch about 3 inches or so. Now if you're, oh, I haven't done that very straight. If you were working for my boss, she would expect to see all of that stitching looking like it was one row of stitches instead of like one that's gone off on a frolic of its own. But I had to do that because I had to get that in, so that when you open out the back edge of your trouser, it's all you can see is that little bit there. But nobody ever looks at that bit. And that is a creased bit. And that is a quarter top pocket. I haven't pressed that out very well. This is what happens when you try to press sitting down. And that's your quarter top pocket.
Beautiful.
But when you go and put, and these are really good sized pockets as well, like proper hand sized pockets that fit like stuff in them, like mobile phones. Woo! Nice big sexy pocket.
I don't think you can see the comments, Flick, because Carl is holding it, but Julia just said, well done and thank you for your time.
That's all right. Yeah, so that is a quarter top pocket. And then obviously my welt pocket from last week, which is on the wrong side of my shorts. So yeah, that's it.
Yay! Let's have a round of applause for Flick, guys.
No, but an on-seam pocket, this part would sit like that, and it's exactly the same principle. So you would have the edge of your pocket bag, the edge of your pocket, sitting parallel to the seam. Can't be easy to do it.
So basically, you've shown us the more difficult version, so we can simplify it and do it as an on-seam pocket if we wish.
On-seam pocket is exactly the same. You just don't chop the bit off at the beginning. You just leave the extra bit in place.
Okay,
so slightly. I sent you the template for this piece and this piece for an on-seam pocket. Well, actually, this piece is exactly the same, but the principle is exactly the same.
Wonderful.
All I would do it in a slightly different order. I wouldn't stitch where I looped round at the top. I wouldn't do that until I'd stitched the seam up, and then I could make sure that the edge of my pocket sits bang on the seam, or slightly, like a very, very small fraction of an inch, like 32nd of an inch over the edge of the seam, so that the edge of the seam is then hidden, so that when you put it together, because the idea with an on-seam pocket is that you can't actually see the seam underneath the pocket. It's completely hidden. I think I did on-seam pockets, but yeah, other than that, it's exactly the same.
Excellent.
And if you were doing tuxedo type evening pants, at this point, that you would stitch your braid on. but normally at work when we're doing tuxedo style trousers and we're putting braid on, we normally put them on an on-seam pocket so that the edge of the braid sits on the edge of the front. Whereas if you're doing quarter top pockets, you can't put the braid on unless you have the braid running up the back leg panel. Does that make sense?
It does.
So yeah, it's once you get the hang of them, they're not hard. They're really not hard.
Excellent.
And when they're done right, they do look amazing, and you can see that there's no gaping. So when that's hanging on a body, it's not going to gape open because you've got that tape. That's the important bit, is putting that tape in, because it's going to stop the pocket from stretching when you've got your hands in your pockets.
And guys, when you get ready to do your tape, just use a bit of selvage from your pocket fabric, was what Flick suggested. We didn't have any special tape. It doesn't need to be fusible or anything like that. So you can just use a bit of selvage or something cut straight on the grain.
Yeah, so long as it's cut straight on the grain, then it's fine. Obviously we don't have time for that at work, so we just buy ours like ready, done. But yeah, it's as long as it's cut straight on the grain, because you want that to overrule the fact that you're working on the bias on both your trouser piece and your pocket bag piece.
Wonderful.
That will cancel out the bias.
Okay, I'm going to stop